Hello, this is TelecomTV. I'm Martin Warwick and I'm talking with Neela Jack of the OpenDaylight project. Before we start talking in more detail about developing APIs for NFV, let's start at a really basic level and ask you, what are APIs?
Sure. Well, obviously API stands for Application Program Interface. An API is the language that you use to communicate to a program or to a piece of hardware.
What role do APIs have in the network virtualized future? And more importantly, perhaps, what benefits will that bring?
So as I said, an API is a language for being able to communicate something. In an NFV and an SDN world, what we now have is a network that is actually programmable. And so I'm going to assume that you have both of those pieces because that's really where it's most interesting. And so let's just say, for example, that you're spinning up a new customer, and as part of that, or a new service. And so you want to spin up a whole new set of things. And so the first question is, how do I communicate down to the different devices, to the different elements, what it is that I need? So it may be simply actions, or it could actually increasingly be policy information. This is a new voice service that I'm setting up. It needs to have high quality of service. And so the languages need to evolve as our capabilities evolve.
So how do APIs need to be developed and implemented?
I think the first question has to be, what are you trying to achieve? I think sometimes people look at developing an API more kind of in the abstract, and what we've had, especially in the standards organization, the standards bodies, it's people who try to guess the way that the future would be, and we've had all these conversations around northbound APIs, and I think at their worst, they become an academic exercise. So in my view, really an API has to come in based on, I have a capability, I have the ability to do something, what language, what commands do I want to pass there? And this is actually where I think it's not just about APIs. If we look, the challenge that we have today in SDN and NFV is we don't yet know what exactly we want to do and how we're going to do it. We have many different implementations. We've got fragmentation. And so personally, I think we need to first really deliver the functionality and determine, right now, for example, we don't have a good way of capturing policy information in a policy repository and communicating that back down to the rest of to the infrastructure. And so I think it's a little strange that we're having all these conversations around what APIs to have when we haven't developed the capability first. So in my view, first we need the capability, and in our case I think we need a common code base, which is what OpenDaylight is working on. And from that, naturally then there's an API that gets developed for being able to communicate the needs to those elements.
And what roles do telcos, vendors, developers and so on play in this API process?
I think they play a big role. To the extent that they know what services they're trying to create, how they're going to charge, it's really important to be able to communicate those needs in a free way. In general, I tend to find it doesn't quite work when an end user, regardless of their carrier or a different kind of end user, to say, this is what I want, this is how you should do it. What makes a lot more sense is they say, this is the result that we're looking at. What we need to be able to create is a way that I need information about how important this user is and how profitable, so that I can change the power on a mobile base station, for example. Right? That's very tangible. Now, what does that mean? How do I do it? Then you can let the developers go figure that out. So I believe, one part is clearly communicating where do you see the profit motives and what does your infrastructure need to do to be able to support that. I think the second one is that's the top down. The bottom up is evaluating new technology, looking at it and seeing what is the promise. Sometimes you're going to get the ideas of what you can create by looking at what the technology can do. So we need carriers to be adopting and playing with open source technology, as well as beta products from the commercial vendors, as a way to be able to give feedback and to say, hey, this is going to be really useful for us. This I don't care about as much.
And a final question to you, what do you think would be the ideal set of APIs?
I think what's important on the API side is that they're open, that they're easy for people to understand and go with. There's a lot of people who say we need one API, one way of doing things. I think what you really want is you want open functionality, and you want to make it very easy to be able to communicate through it. So I think that in an OpenStack way, the Neutron APIs are certainly critical. I think around service provider, there are a set of set of specific ones. I think the more important one is use REST where there isn't a performance implication. I think REST opens it up so that everybody can work on it. I think the other one key thing, and the industry needs to go away from it, right now there are a number of players that create proprietary APIs, closed APIs, internal APIs that they see and nobody else does. And you get a behavior where an engineer moves from one company to another, is told to do something, goes, I know how to do that. Oh, I know how to access it, but it's a private API. And so then their employer faces a lawsuit. There is no room, I think, in my mind, for a proprietary API. That is bad for customers, it's bad for the industry. We need to push people to create as many APIs, as many ways to be able to interact with the infrastructure and allow the end users to be able to code it themselves or to have other people to build value on top of platforms.
Neil and Jacques, thanks very much.
You're very welcome.